Welcome. My name is Andre Weltman. I'm the chairman of the Friends of Pine Grove Furnace State Park, and I'm currently the president of the Board of Trustees of the Cumberland County Historical Society. I'm pleased to kick off this lecture series, The ABCs of Cumberland County, with A is for Amusement Park. I'm going to be speaking briefly about the trolley parks of the late 19th century into the early 20th. So what is a trolley park? The idea is that in the era before automobiles, urban populations could easily get on a rail line, whether a true short-haul trolley or sometimes a longer railroad, and ride in relative comfort out into the countryside to enjoy the outdoors and for a little while escape the crowded and sometimes noxious urban environment. And this is something of a new idea in the late 1800s. Now, Cumberland County has several examples of trolley parks, or sometimes we can call them railroad parks. For example, the village of Boiling Springs has the Island Grove Park, which was constructed by the iron company there just outside of town in 1875. And a bit later, a more classic trolley park was built right next to Children's Lake in 1905 and continued operating until, I believe, 1930. And these are great examples of increasing passenger traffic on a rail line in order to increase revenue. Another example is immediately adjacent to Mount Holly Springs in the famous gap in the mountains. The Mount Holly Park opened in 1901, and in this postcard view, you can see a trolley. I also should mention that this concept was used by another iron company down in Mont Alto, so that's Franklin County, our next door neighbor, and that also opened in 1875 to bring passenger traffic onto a commercial rail line. Today, that is Mont Alto State Park, the first state park in the Pennsylvania system. For the rest of this presentation, I'm going to focus on a very successful park that was built by the iron company at Pine Grove Furnace. It is in what is today Pine Grove Furnace State Park. So the iron company had constructed the South Mountain Railroad, which was in full operation by early 1870, but hauling only commercial traffic, it was not bringing in enough revenue. So to increase money by increasing passenger traffic, the amusement park was constructed. It was very close to the industrial operation. You can see here on this later railroad map, when the South Mountain had become the Hunters Run and Slate Belt Railroad, that there was a separate stop between Laurel Forge and the end of the line at the Pine Grove Furnace iron stack. So it was only a mile east from the furnace, which was still an industrial operation, and not quite 2 miles west of Laurel Forge, what is today the park's Laurel Lake. It was built in a convenient bend in Mountain Creek, right next to the rail line, and was about 30 acres with multiple buildings and attractions and activities. It was in full operation the year after it was built in 1879, and by 1880, over 21,000 visitors per year were riding the rail line. Technically, the park was free, but the idea is that people paid to get on the train. There were all sorts of rustic entertainments, as they called it, but there were also more developed features. There was a restaurant and dining room run by the famous Mansion House of Carlisle. And there was, in the promotional materials, they described a log cabin for ladies' toilet rooms. They don't say what gentlemen were supposed to do while they were out in the woods. Here's one of the few photographs we have today of the park. The rail line is just off the left edge of the photograph. So you'd step out of the train, cross one of several small bridges across the creek, and you'd be into the main area of the park. You could stroll along forest paths. You could bring your own food for a picnic, and that's hyphenated because in the 19th century, that new word in English, borrowed from French, was spelled that way. There was boating and fishing. In later years, there was a wooden bicycle racetrack. But all through the era of this park, from 1878 to about 1900, there was dancing in a 60-foot pavilion right next to the creek. You could either bring your own band if you were some civic group, say out of Carlisle or Harrisburg, but the amusement park had its own live brass band, and later Jackson Fuller brought in an orchestrion, which is a sort of automated organ for playing. There was a water-powered flying horses, what we would today call a carousel or merry-go-round. And it is really unfortunate that the only image we have of the flying horses at Pine Grove Park is this small sketch from a promotional poster, which is also located behind me here in the Museum of the Cumberland County Historical Society. But the same New York City company, Charles W. Dare, built some other flying horses at carousels, and one of them that survives in Rhode Island is probably a good example of what was at Pine Grove. There was 10 pins, or what we would today call bowling, and the Mountain Creek was dammed up to make a 2-acre lake, which they said was not over 2 feet deep, making it perfectly safe for children. And as you can see in this illustration, again from the poster, there are boats. And in this photograph on the right side, you can see a gentleman standing, and behind him is one of those boats. And the foreground of this picture is that little dam on Mountain Creek. But it must have been a very narrow lake. I almost hesitate to use the word lake. So I think if you got in that boat and rowed, you'd go once, twice, hit one bank, once, twice, hit the opposite bank again. So it wasn't much of a ride. Immediately adjacent to the railroad tracks, there was a baseball playing field, so you could entertain yourself while you were waiting for the train to carry you back home. That area, I believe, is today where the remnants of a Girl Scout swimming pool are, so it's considerably different in appearance now. Something you might not think of at an amusement park is a true rifle shooting range. I'm not talking about a carnival type affair. These were real weapons, and they boasted at Pine Grove that their range was 200 yards long. So it must have been pretty noisy, but they did orient it away from the amusement area for safety, heading south towards Adams County. They joked that bullets from missiles would go over the target and land down in Adams County. In this era, when consumption of alcohol was often frowned upon, the particularly abstemious owners of the park would promote the idea that there was no alcohol and no gambling. So Jay Cook and Jackson Fuller really did not like alcohol. However, this was far from perfect, as this newspaper in 1879 mentions that 2 men were arrested at Pine Grove Park for selling whiskey and playing 3-card Monte. If you got bored of these rustic entertainments and the bicycle racing and boating and so forth, you could pay a little extra money and get on a self-contained steam car, the Baldwin, which was originally used at the famous 1876 Centennial in Philadelphia, and it would take you less than a mile down the regular railroad tracks to take a look at the iron furnace in operation, sort of an early factory tour, we might think of it. Now, Pine Grove Park, despite its popularity, waned. The attractions fell into disrepair, and we think it shut down around 1900 or 1901. You'll notice that that's the same year that the park in the Gap at Mount Holly Springs opened up. Let me briefly tell you what happened to that same area in what is now Pine Grove Furnace State Park in later years. For just a couple years, 1913 and 1914, it was used as a summer camp for children from the Carlisle Indian Industrial School. They could ride the railroad to get there. And notice the pavilion that these girls are sitting in for their meal. That's the same structure on the same footings that was used for the amusement park dance pavilion. The Boy Scouts came in 1920. In 1921, a very successful Girl Scout camp was there. It originally used only Army surplus tents, but there were a few structures remaining from the old amusement park, including that 60-foot dance pavilion seen here with some alterations in later decades. Today, along the state park's Copenhagen hiking trail, the only really visible remnant of the amusement park area is this foundation, which is exactly 60 feet long, going all the way back to the dance pavilion from the amusement park. Thank you.